Okay, so now our first question comes from Abby. In your opinion, Dr. Sala, is Putin the driving force behind the White Hat Earth Alliance? And what role is the authentic versus actor Donald Trump fulfilling regarding the future of Earth? Will, in your opinion, disclosure take place by the end of 2024? Or are we going to be looking at 2025? Thank you for all you are doing.
Okay, well, there's quite a few questions wrapped up in that. I think that there are a number of major world leaders involved in the Earth Alliance, but the one that has really taken the bull by the horns here is Russia and Vladimir Putin. He's the one that, first of all, stopped the destruction of Syria. Syria was one of those states that was targeted by the deep state. General Wesley Clark mentioned Syria as one of the seven, but Putin came in and he rescued and prevented the deep state takedown of the Bashar al-Assad Ba'athist regime in Syria. And that was very important because the Syrian regime continues. There are still parts of Syria that are relatively untouched by the civil war there. And that was a big thorn. Putin was instrumental in stopping the deep state there. Of course, he stopped the deep state plans in Ukraine. And also he played the critical role in ensuring that the Iran-Israel conflict would not spiral out of control into this Gog and Magog war. And I think in future history, especially when people piece together this information about how the deep state timed Israel's attack on Iran to coincide with this peaking of sunspot activities, which was the most propitious time for a global war to break out, and that Putin stepped in to get Iran to de-escalate and to kind of calm things down. That, I think, is going to be pivotal, and I think the world in the end will owe a great deal of gratitude to Putin and Russia for playing the role it has played. Now, that doesn't mean that other world leaders, other major members of the Earth Alliance haven't played a role behind the scenes, but I think Putin has been up front in terms of playing the leading role, and the reason is that he's committed his military forces to ensuring that these deep state goals are not met, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Our next question comes from Autism Librarian. In your book, Kennedy's Last Stand, you discussed how JFK attempted joint space operations with the Soviet Union to obtain control over UFO matters during his presidency. It seems that there continues to be instigation of conflict between the US and Russia. With your background in conflict resolution, what do you think it will take for better relationships with Russia? What can everyday people do to heal this conflict and help drive the planet toward our Star Trek future?
Yes, that's a very important question. I think there's going to be a need for healing because there's been a tremendous amount of propaganda, negative propaganda, directed against Russia for the positions it's taken, because the mainstream mockingbird media in the global press has demonized Russia. And of course, people have been taking sides. And so once the deep state is exposed and removed from power, there's going to be a need for healing, because Russia is a very important country for the future. It needs to be a critical part of this global alliance, or this Earth Alliance. And even though cooperation in terms of these classified programs, as I was been describing, the space arcs, meeting extraterrestrial motherships and so forth, there's been cooperation there between covert military personnel. As far as the general public is concerned, there's been a lot of friction. So that's going to take healing. But I think as the truth comes out and people realize that the deep state was behind everything and was manipulating people to hate Russia, hate Putin, hate Trump, because they didn't want Russia and the United States collaborating to bring about a better Earth, and these incredible disclosures that lie ahead. Because I think a Russian and US collaboration and the creation of global peace is going to be critical for disclosing all of the advanced technologies that have been kept kind of mothballed or kept away from the general public for decades.
And we have another question voted up by Autism Librarian. Just as Nazis infiltrated the US through Operation Paperclip, did Nazis also infiltrate Russia and negatively impact their advances in science, similar to the negative impact in the USA?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The Nazis, and I described this in my book, Antarctica's Hidden History, the corporate foundations of secret space programs, agreements were reached in the United States between the Fourth Reich and the US. And those agreements were ones that the deep state wanted. They supported those agreements. And as far as I can tell, Russia did not have those kinds of agreements. But nevertheless, Russia, as I pointed out, continued to work with the US Navy behind the scenes in information sharing. So there was, and as I also discussed in my book on the US Navy secret space program, on the one hand, you had the US Navy working with these positive human-looking groups, and on the other hand, you had the Air Force working with the Antarctic Germans and with the kind of grey reptilian groups. So, there was a lot of, within the US, you had different military services. So I think Russia, on the one hand, in the classified world, continued to work with the Navy. And I mentioned Admiral Leslie Stevens as being a key figure who helped the Russian space program, or helped their initial reverse engineering programs take off on a steady foundation, that the Navy was helping Russia behind the scenes, that the Solar Warden program was sharing technology, but that the other branches of the US military, especially the Air Force and the intelligence community, had reached these agreements with the Antarctic Germans, the Fourth Reich, and so there was overt hostility, and so the Russians were opposed to that. And the Russians, they expelled the German scientists from Kapustin Yar after they had been there for a few years. And I think that they did that because they didn't want to go through the same process whereby in the United States, the German paperclip scientists were promoted to high positions in the space programs, in major corporations, and so they became like a fifth column that enabled the Fourth Reich to assert control and really take over the US in a kind of silent coup. Russia didn't want to go down that path, so Russia expelled the German paperclip scientists. And I mentioned that there were 2,500 German scientists that were brought to Kapustin Yar, while Russia, and I can't remember the year, expelled them. And I think that suggested that the Russians were very wary of these German scientists as being a fifth column for the Antarctic Germans.
And next, Mark Davis says, aloha, Dr. Sala. Were the U.S. covert agencies responsible for Russian failures to land on the moon before the U.S.? Mahalo for your brilliant contributions to humanity.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question. I mean, the Russians have had quite a few failed space missions, but I did mention the KGB cosmonauts that flew on these one-way missions, these Lunokhod missions, to establish some kind of Soviet presence on the moon. I think there was also a secret space program cooperation happening behind the scenes. I do think that even though the deep state was doing all it could to inhibit and to kind of stop the Russian space program from taking off, nevertheless, the Russians were being helped by the Navy to develop a viable space program. So, so I think that on the one hand, you would have had the deep state using its assets to shoot down Russian rockets that were part of their kind of a civilian space program. But on the other hand, you would have had white hats, the US Navy in particular, trying to help the Russians to kind of get up to speed with these advanced technologies, because because they knew that in the future Russia would play a very important role.
Our next question, hello, Dr. Sala. Is the Russian disclosure process as delayed and blocked as the one in the US and in the EU? Thank you.
Well, yes to that question. I mean, we've got to distinguish between official disclosure and the kind of unofficial disclosure. Now, at an unofficial level, you've had things happening in Russia that have not happened in the West. I mentioned that Russian governor of Kalmykia province, that Kursan Ilumzhinov, where he was allowed to go on major television and talk about his extraterrestrial contact experience in 2010. And this was something that was really remarkable, that a governor of a state was able to talk openly about extraterrestrial contact and wasn't driven out of office as a consequence. Imagine if a governor of any major US state or any US state talked openly about having contact with extraterrestrials, was taken on a ship, met these humanoid extraterrestrials that were friendly, shared information and history, and took them to another planet. I think most people would assume that there would be an effort to impeach that governor as someone that was mentally unstable or delusional. But in Russia, what Putin did instead was that he did nothing to undermine the governor, Governor Ilumzhinov. And then 2 years later, you had the Prime Minister, Medvedev, giving this speech to this Russian television network, really spilling the beans about this secret organization monitoring extraterrestrials living among us. So I think when you look at those and other examples, we can say that while at an official level, Russia is as tight-lipped as anyone else concerning extraterrestrials, at a kind of unofficial civil level, Russia has actually done much more in terms of encouraging disclosure, because people have listened to Medvedev, and Medvedev continues to play a key role in Russian politics, even though he said something that would, for many people, was outlandish. So I think there is this publicly not much disclosure, but at an unofficial or covert level, yes, there's been an encouragement of disclosure.
Our next question comes from Henrietta Lee. And this question represents a topic that is still being hotly debated in the chat, by the way. Hello, Dr. Sala. I understand that Putin is a white hat. Is this correct? To me, he seems to be a benign being. Thank you all for all of your work to assist Terrans in bringing truth. I love your books and have read several.
Well, I think we need to distinguish between an authoritarian leader and a leader that fulfills a positive function, a positive purpose. I mean, you can have an authoritarian leader that many people revile, but yet that leader performs an indispensable service to helping free humanity from this satanic deep state. And that's exactly where Putin steps in. I think there are many policies that Putin has passed that I would not do myself. I wouldn't agree with those. I think that they're very authoritarian. But I look at the big picture he has played in terms of this bigger picture of stopping the deep state from bringing about this Gog and Magog end times war. And that, I think, is really important, because people don't understand, I don't maybe appreciate how terrible it would have been if the deep state succeeded in pulling off this Gog and Magog war. But Putin stopped it. And I think at the end of the day, history will remember Vladimir Putin not so much in terms of, he's an authoritarian leader, he crushed dissidents and made life miserable for people that espouse democratic values. I think people will say, okay, sure, those things happen. But by and large, he will be remembered by history as the man that defeated the deep state. And I think that is something that we need to acknowledge, despite maybe people having a personal antipathy to his authoritarian policies.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Carol. Hi, Dr. Sala. I understand there is a space ark in Russia. Do you have any information on whether it has been activated or not by the Russian secret space program? Thank you.
Well, I did mention that actually. There was that communication from Thorhan Aredian where he talked about the ark that had been found in northern Russia, that it had activated, and that the technology in it was being developed with the support of extraterrestrials. That positive extraterrestrials were helping Russia understand and use that technology for their purposes. And so, yes, Russia has been finding found an activated space ark and has been using that technology for its purposes with the help of positive extraterrestrials.
And we have a question from Lisa M. Thank you, Dr. Sala. With regards to the Fourth Reich, is this referring to the secret war that followed the public war? If so, is this secret war, Fourth Reich, still active today?
Well, yes, definitely. That secret war with the Fourth Reich began immediately after the end of the Second World War, because, as I said, the Germans established a breakaway colony in Antarctica and elsewhere around the planet that were linked together, and that the Germans had their own extraterrestrial agreements and had extraterrestrials helping them, and so they defeated Operation High Jump, the U.S. Navy, and from that day onwards, they have played a big role in infiltrating the US and compromising US institutions. And up until very recently, the deep state and this Fourth Reich had incredible influence over the planet. But because of these recent events, the power of the deep state and of the Fourth Reich has been severely curtailed, but not totally eliminated. They still have some resources and assets, but as far as the German Dark Fleet is concerned, I believe a lot of their assets have been trapped outside of our solar system. And those assets that were in our solar system, they were taken over or defeated in revolutionary war or planetary liberation wars that happened on Mars, as Elena Danan has talked about.
And Tony has our next question. Do the extraterrestrials accept Russian Orthodox views on gender? Very, very curious to see their level of acceptance of human personal issues, as Putin's own acceptance is clear.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Yes, I mean, Putin's Russia is very much a kind of Christian nation, and they espouse kind of like traditional Christian families. Now, as far as extraterrestrials are concerned, when it comes to gender, I think they are much more fluid. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have some extraterrestrials having very similar views about the traditional gender, the two gender category that traditional Christian groups cherish, say in Russia. But I think by and large, the gender question is much more fluid in extraterrestrial cultures. I mean, they have hermaphrodites, they have asexual beings. So I think there's been much more variation amongst extraterrestrials than what you would find, say, in a traditional Russian Christian Orthodox worldview.
And we have two more questions before we'll be finished here. So this next one comes from Rich. I am finding it very difficult to decide what is true. There are so many lies. Dr. Sala, on what basis do you decide what is true?
Well, you got the gut feeling, things that resonate. I mean, that's the first level. If something resonates, that's the first level. I mean, then you typically have like a small circle of friends, trusted confidants that tell you their opinion about something. And so I rely on that as well. I have my small circle of friends and aid or people that I consult with, advisors, that give me their opinion, Angelica being one, for example. Then you have kind of like a wider collection of empirical events and facts. I've been talking about events and facts that can't be denied in this. So when I talk about the truth of Russia defeating the deep state, I didn't give you my opinion. I presented facts that are indisputable, that Russia saved Syria from destruction from a deep state operation, that there was a deep state operation to take down 7 states, that there was a effort to create a major war in the Middle East, triggered by this Israeli attack on Iran, that coincided with this increase in sunspot activity, which is associated with war historically. So those are facts. So there's the combination of all of those things is how I get the truth.
And our last question comes from Edward Chin. With the Jupiter Accords, would you see more advanced disclosures from Australia, Japan, France, the UK, etc.? Will we see more advanced disclosures? We seem to have lots of whistleblowers from the US, but there hasn't been much from other leading spacefaring nations.
Well, I think the reason for that is that the deep state has had much more control over these other countries, like my country, Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Italy. The deep state has had a lot more control over these countries. But what I've described is this kind of planetary liberation in fulfillment of Edgar Cayce's prophecy, that the deep state has been defeated, that the sons of Belial have been defeated, and because of that, the Earth Alliance will emerge victorious. And the Earth Alliance plan, as I understand it, is to disclose all of these technologies because they want us to very quickly transition into a Star Trek future. I mean, that's the plan of the Earth Alliance. That's why the Artemis Accords are so popular, because this is the vision shared between the leading space powers. So I think what we are going to be witnessing in the months ahead, especially in the United States, with this new election, with this next election coming up, as Donald Trump regains the presidency, that I think after that event, then you're going to have this kind of like reconciliation between the United States and Russia, where Putin and Trump kind of like come together to reconcile their two countries. That's when I think the Earth Alliance is going to cement their victory, reveal a lot of the terrible things that the deep state has done, and all of these advanced technologies are going to be released to the world. So I think we've got a lot to look forward to. This is an exciting time, and it's great to be here, and thank you all, and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.